During this presentation, your questions are welcome. What we would ask you to do is to please type any questions that you have. We will try to answer some of those as we go through the presentation. If at the end of the presentation your question is unanswered, we will, at the end of this presentation, email all of you all of the questions that were asked and the answers to those questions so that you can refer to those. In addition, you will also be able to find a copy of this presentation at the address in front of you, which is www.fop.net/programs/education/index. You should be able to find that by just going to the FOP.net website under Programs and under Educational Services, and you will be able to see all of the information about our webinar series. Today we're going to talk about the organizing and the 5 steps of organizing new bargaining units. Organizing is one of the hardest and most time-consuming tasks that any union performs. Successful organizing begins with strong leadership. Leadership in the FOP turns over in some local lodges fairly frequently, and so sometimes we don't develop the skills that we need to. If a lodge decides it wants to be involved in the organizing process, it needs to make sure that it gets its leaders to be trained and to understand that process so that they can be strong leaders throughout the organizing effort. Organizing is how a labor organization introduces itself to employees who, when the labor organization wants to become the bargaining agent for the bargaining unit. When you get ready to organize, you need to recognize that there will be some challenges to your decision to organize a bargaining unit. First, you may face employer opposition or hostility. You may see employees who don't want to be seen with union supporters. Or you may even see employees who may see an advantage to be very vocal and side with management when management is in opposition or hostile to your efforts. Another challenge that you'll have to overcome is the fiscal crisis in government that's going on today in our world, unfortunately. Sometimes the bad economic times limit the effectiveness of the organizing message. A lot of officers will look at that and say, why would I want to be part of an organized union if there's no possibility of a raise or no probability of a raise? However, at the same time, when you have a lot of communities who are looking for concessions, you have an opportunity to say that instead of the community imposing concessions without input from the members of the bargaining unit, that those members should have a say, and therefore they need to be organized so that they have a seat at the table and an opportunity to have input into what kinds of concessions, if any, are going to occur. Another challenge is an indifferent workforce. We know that apathy is always a challenge. We also know that in any organization, 95% of the work is done by 5% of the people. We also talked a minute ago about the need for strong leaders. Another challenge in the organizing process is leaders who don't want to lead. They just want to get in the way. And we need to figure out how we're going to deal with those leaders and to get them to be actively involved in the organizing process. When we talk about the 5 basic steps of organizing, we need to recognize that each workplace is different. The laws, the rules, the regulations, everywhere around this country is going to be different when you get ready to organize in that location. There are some basic things that are going to work in every location, but you also need to understand the difference. There's a great deal of work that you need to do to obtain collective bargaining and establish a collective bargaining agreement and to become the bargaining agent for a new unit. Until you enter into this process, you will not realize how many details there are to be taken care of. Preparation is a key for success. The 5 steps to organize are building an organizing committee, developing a strategy, circulating petition or interest cards, win the election, and carry out any promises that you made in the process. Step 1 in this process is to build an organizing committee. You need to identify people who will help lead the organizing effort. They do not have to be elected leaders of your local lodge to be involved in the organizing effort. One of the things that we strongly encourage you to do is to look at the agency that you're trying to organize and try to identify the people that are the go-to people for officers inside that agency. Not necessarily people of rank, not necessarily people who are elected to office, but they may be the individual that when somebody has a question, that's who they go to. You want to try to identify who those folks are, and you want to approach those people and see if you can't get them to support your effort and to be actively involved. Because if you can bring the people that other officers look up to over to your side, it's going to help you immensely in your efforts. You want to try to avoid getting on your committee the people who are always negative about everything. They may be vocal, but you may not want them on your committee. You need to think long and hard about whether or not they're appropriate to have in your effort and what role they should play. You want to think about the makeup of your committee. You're going to have people from different work areas, people from different shifts and different groups and different assignments. You want to try to make sure that you represent all of those different workplace locations. You want to try to remember other subgroups in law enforcement. We know that around the country there are various other organizations that have members of subgroups such as the Latino Police Officers Association, the Women Police Officers Association, the Black Police Officers Association. All of those groups can be very helpful to you. You need to make sure that you reach out to those entities and get them involved in your effort and help them understand why the FOP is the best organization to be the bargaining agent for your bargaining unit, and how you're going to include them in your process so that those groups and their membership are clearly involved in every step of the way. The people you select to be on your organizing committee must be willing to work. They must be willing to work hard. They must be willing to work to educate themselves and to educate their coworkers. They cannot be afraid to go out and talk to their coworkers about issues that are important to them and important to their coworkers. People you sometimes may overlook that you may want to reach out to are people like past leaders of your organization that have retired. If you have retired members in your lodge, there's a wealth of knowledge of people who may have been through something similar. There are some lodges in the country that are located in locations where you have a lot of retirees that come from other lodges around the country. Reach out to those folks and see if you can't get them involved in your efforts and see if they wouldn't be willing to help you. Also, be aware that there's support available to you from the state, generally from most state lodges, and certainly from the National FOP. And we're going to talk later about the National FOP Labor Services Division and how it works and what support it can provide to you in your efforts. You need to make sure that your committee tracks some basic information about your workplace and the workplace you're looking to organize. How many different locations does it work? Does it have employees working at? How many employees are at each location? How many employees are on each shift? How many employees have some sort of special needs that you need to be aware of? In the process, your committee needs to always be looking for volunteers that you can reach out to and try to utilize. You need to obtain a roster of the proposed bargaining unit, and if that's your entire police agency, then reach out and get a roster of your police agency that's divided by what shifts they are on and where they're located, where they're headquartered at. Keep that roster up to date as people move around, as things change in your organization. Keep that roster up to date. If things in the structure of your agency shift during this process, make sure you always track the right information and change the committee's workplace information so all members of the committee have access to the same basic information that they will need. Remember that the composition of your committee is essential to success. You're going to have to put somebody in charge of being the campaign coordinator. And you need to think about who that campaign coordinator could be. It could be a current or past leader of your lodge. There are professionals out there that make a living being organizers, and you could retain their services. You can also, from some state lodges, retain the services from a state lodge, or the National FOP has an organizer on staff, and you could retain the services through the National FOP if that's what your lodge decided it needed to do. So there are resources out there, but whoever you put in charge, you need to make sure that they're comfortable with their role of being the campaign coordinator, because they will be in charge of coordinating everything and every step of the campaign. You need to also think about who you're going to put in charge of various aspects of the campaign, things like public communications. Who's going to be the public face of this campaign? In most communities, the community is going to be interested if you're trying to organize their police department. They're going to want to know what's going on. And there's going to be questions asked of you. Somebody's got to be the person who deals with those. Somebody's got to be the person who's talking to community groups. The larger the community, the more people you're going to need tasked with being in charge of that aspect of the process. Same thing with member communications. The biggest thing you're going to need to do at this point in the process is to make sure that your communications with your members are spot on, because that's who you're trying to convince at this point in time. You need to make sure you're very clear as to who's in charge and what the messages are going to be to your members. You're going to need somebody in charge of the administrative side. We talked earlier about the need to keep up a roster and keep that information up to date. Somebody's got to be in charge of that. There's going to be mailings that are going to need to be done, or emails that are going to need to be sent, or hopefully you'll have social media at work. Somebody's going to have to be responsible for making sure that your messages are getting out through all the different methods that you're going to use. So you really need to think about how you're going to divide up the duties. You ought to leave the campaign coordinator to be the coordinator, the person who is overall responsible for getting the campaign taken care of, and then make sure that there are very good lieutenants underneath who will be responsible for certain specific aspects that have to be accomplished to run a successful campaign. No matter who you have in their position, make sure that you have somebody that's accountable to move the campaign forward, ensure that the bases are covered throughout the entire process, and also make sure that that person has a relationship with the leadership of your lodge, and that that person is reporting on a regular basis to the leadership about what's going on and how the campaign is working. You next want to start drafting a plan of action. You want to identify timelines. You need to make sure that your efforts are all directed at what it takes for the FOP to win on Election Day. You've selected your campaign team. You need to develop a strategy. You need to assign roles and responsibilities. You need to lay out a timeline for every step of the campaign. You need to make sure you know what messages you want to send and how you're going to communicate those messages. And you need to talk about what marketing materials you might use in this effort and what they're going to be, when they're going to be distributed, and how you're going to get them out into the hands of the members who are going to ultimately, you're going to ask to vote for you at the end of the day. Some of the things you need to think about when you draft your action plan. What are we offering? Why should somebody vote for the FOP? You need to be out there constantly when you're out talking to members, looking for additional informal leaders that you can get on your side to help in this campaign. You need to think about geographical considerations. You don't want to be in a position where, particularly in a large city, you've got somebody responsible for too big of an area and they can't get out and touch base with all the people they need to touch base to. You need to think about making sure that everything you assign to people is manageable for those people to do. You need to figure out how you're going to identify your campaign workers, or how the membership should identify your campaign workers and what their assignments are going to be. You need to think about what kind of publications you're going to use or advertise in if that's appropriate. What your website's going to look like, what your Facebook page is going to look like. I know a lot of law enforcement officers do not like doing phone banks, but every bit of experience will tell you that phone banks are successful, particularly at the end of the campaign when it's time to get out the vote. To remind people to get out the vote, you need to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, did you remember to vote today? So you need to think about how that phone bank is going to roll into your action plan. You need to spend time identifying the needs and wants of the people in the bargaining unit, the concerns of the officers in the past. Think about what affects the majority, not just a few individuals. See if you can determine what past or active grievances or complaints have been that have not been addressed, or even those that have been addressed, how they got resolved. Think about potential upcoming changes in your agency, changes in shift scheduling, things that are going on in other agencies, things that the economy is forcing your community to talk about doing, such as layoffs or furloughs, and how that's going to affect things inside your agency. And consider how that's all going to roll into your plan of action. Don't try and do this on your own. Organizing is not an individual effort. It's a group effort. Recruit members to assist in this effort, get support of other groups, and recognize the value of past experience. See if you can't find people in your area, whether they're from another lodge, they're from the state lodge, they're from a different agency, who are in your area, available to give you the value of their experience. You can always pick up the phone and call the National FOP Labor Services Division. There is no charge to pick up the phone and call our division. Our division will be happy to give you advice and guidance. That's part of the per capita that you pay to the National FOP, so do not feel like you're out there on your own, and feel free to contact us whenever you want. Think about the position of your board members during the campaign. Your board members will not know what's going on unless you make sure that they know. If you're the campaign coordinator, you need to make sure your board knows what's going on, and you need to make sure that you know what your board's thinking about the campaign. Get them involved early. Have a planning meeting with the board to start out your campaign. Get them involved early and get them involved often. And make sure that they know exactly what you're doing, and make sure you solicit their input on what they believe the strengths or weaknesses of your campaign are. If they're not going to be actively involved in it, you don't want them out there saying that you're not running it right. You want to make sure that they're out there being supportive and that they're saying the right things. When you're talking to your board, take notes. Something that somebody says today may not mean much to you, but it may mean something to you 2 weeks from now, or or a month from now. When you're in the middle of the campaign, you may say, oh yeah, I remember Joe was talking about that when we met with the board. Remember, the leadership of the lodge needs to make sure that they feel like they own this campaign. It's a lodge effort. The board was elected to support the lodge, to run the lodge. You need to make sure that they're part of this process. Unity of the campaign staff and the board of directors are very important to the successful conclusion of your efforts. The next thing you want to do is you want to talk about the strategy. You want to develop a plan for the campaign. You want to identify a list of benefits of being organized and the improvements that the FOP can provide by being the bargaining agent. You want to think about the timing of your visits to workplaces and various shifts. You want to create talking points so that everybody who goes out and talks on behalf of your campaign is talking from the same sheet of paper. They're talking about the same things. They're saying the same basic things. They may not say them exactly in the same way, but they're covering the points that, as a group, you've decided need to be covered when you're out there talking to the members. And do not be afraid, once you create talking points, to modify those talking points as the campaign develops and matures. You might recognize that you need to add additional information or focus on different areas when you're out talking to the membership. Develop a list of issues that you want to be aware of that may be raised by your opposition, may be raised by your employer, may be raised by people who just don't like the FOP or people who just are wanting information and answers. So you need to think about what kinds of issues you need to make sure you address. If you don't know the answers, when your people are out, tell people that you will get them the answer. Make sure you know who they are and what question they're asking, and then make sure you go get the answer and get back to them. Nobody expects you to know everything, but they do expect that you will get them the answer and get back to them. As you go on developing your strategy, you need to think about how you're going to communicate your message. You need to think about what you're going to say in workplace visits, if you're allowed to go, and be aware you need to find out if you're going to be allowed to visit during roll calls. Some places you may not be allowed to go into roll calls or anywhere on the employer's work site. You may have to do everything off the premises of the employer. You need to be very aware of what the laws are in the area that you're operating in, and make sure that you do not go out of the way and cause yourself some problems by doing something that you're prohibited from doing, such as being in the employer's workplace when you shouldn't have been, campaigning on duty when you shouldn't have been. Those kinds of things you need to think about how you're going to get your message done in spite of the restrictions that may be placed on you in this process. You can always ask if you can do workplace visits, if you can do roll calls, and I've seen lots of places where they've allowed you to do roll calls to talk about your organizing efforts, and I've seen lots of places where they've prohibited it also. And I've spent time standing on the sidewalk talking to people as they came into work, talking to them in their cars when they rolled down the window, or talking to them as they're leaving at the end of their shift. Think about having an FOP function where you can invite non-members to attend so you get the opportunity to talk to them. Think about what printed material and emails. Think about how you're going to use the internet, the social media, such as Facebook. Think about how you're going to use texting. We've got some great examples recently where social media has had great results for these kinds of campaigns, and you need to think about how those kinds of tools can be used in your strategy. One of the things that you need to do, I talked earlier about the need to get a roster. You want to have the various members of your committee go through that roster individually and go through each individual name and tell us on a scale of 1 to 5 how they think that person, that individual, is reacting to your message. And you want to give them ultimately a compilation of all the different people that know that individual, how they believe that individual is looking at the FOP and the FOP's organizing effort. You're going to give them a rating somewhere on the scale of 1 to 5. 1 would be somebody who's willing to be a leader and an activist for the FOP. They'll be out there talking to you. They'll be out there doing things for you, getting petitions signed, getting cards signed. They'll be out there actively working for you. 2 are people who are going to vote for you, but they're not willing, or they don't have the time, or whatever it is, to be somebody who's going to work for you, but they'll vote for you. 3 are those people that you don't know how they're going to vote. They're neither actively against you, they're neither actively for you, and they're not making comment, or they're undecided. 4 is somebody that you think is leaning against the FOP. They're not angry, they're not actively opposing the FOP, but they're not supporting the FOP either. And 5 is a definite no. That's the people who are supporting potentially your opposition, or maybe supporting your employer if your employer is opposed to the organizing effort. If they're a definite no, don't spend any time arguing with them. Don't spend any time getting into heated debates with people who are opposed to what you want to do. You're not going to change their mind. So just ignore them. Just leave them alone. When I say ignore them, I don't mean that you should pretend like they don't exist when you're in the room with them. Be nice to them, be friendly to them, but don't spend your effort. It's a waste of your time and effort to actively try to convince them that their decision to oppose you is wrong. You need to spend your time and effort. When you look at this list, you're going to spend your time and effort. You're not going to spend your time on 1s. You're not going to spend your time on 2s. You're going to spend your time on 3s and maybe on 4s. And what that allows you to do, what this ranking system allows you to do, is to focus your energy. When you know somebody's undecided, you can go out and you can try to identify people that are very close to that individual, who are supporters of yours, and see if you can't get them to speak to their good friend or their coworker about why the FOP is the right decision. That's the people that are going to make a difference in your campaign. Spend your time on them. Do not spend it on the 5s. When you're communicating your message, agree with everybody as to what, on your committee, as to what improvements the FOP is going to bring. And if you can't identify improvements about what the FOP is going to bring, then you probably shouldn't be out there trying to organize people. The purpose of organization is you're going to make things better for the membership. So you got to be creative in thinking about what all kinds of improvements you can potentially bring. You need to have answers prepared for the common questions that you're going to get, and you need to make sure that everybody's given the same kind of information. Make sure that everybody's on the same page. Think about what you can offer that other organizations don't have. We've got an example of a city where there are 6 different organizations that have membership in that city, in that city's police department. The Black Police Officers Association, the Latino Police Officers Association, the Women's Police Officers Association, the FOP, 2 other competing general membership kinds of organizations. Each of those brings something special and unique to their membership. You need to figure out what those things would be, and you need to figure out what's special and unique about what it is the FOP can bring to those folks. Maybe it's that you've got great skills in collective bargaining, or you've got somebody that's going to come in and bargain for you that's very talented. Maybe it's the legal program. Maybe you're going to be involved in the National FOP Legal Defense Plan, which is better and less expensive than virtually any other plan out there available in the country. Maybe it's the amount of information that's available through the National FOP website. A lot of you, if you've not been involved in the collective bargaining side yet, may not be aware of the amount of collective bargaining contracts and demographics and other data that's available through the information system that will help you on the labor side. Maybe it's the National FOP legislative program. There are lots and lots of things that the FOP can bring to your membership, and we can help you figure out what it is you should be offering to your members if you're going to move forward with your organizing effort. Just give us a call and we'll be happy to do that. Remember, some of the other advantages is there's 325,000 members nationwide in the FOP. There's probably not an issue that you're dealing with inside your police department or your lodge that hasn't been dealt with somewhere in the country by some other FOP member. One of the advantages of the National FOP Network is that we can help identify who those folks are and put you in touch with them. We've never yet had the occasion where an FOP member refused to assist a fellow FOP member when they were asked to give them support. Not financial support, but information or to share their experience. They've always been willing, and I'm sure that all of you, if we picked up the phone and asked you to share something that you were unique about, that you would be willing to share that with a fellow law enforcement officer and a fellow FOP member. Remember, in the FOP, all levels of the organization are ran by FOP members. They're ran by police officers. Police officers have been representing cops and protecting cops for a long time, since 1915. That's a lot of members out there and a lot of support that can assist in your efforts. In step 3 of the process, you need to design interest cards or a petition. What you're going to design and what you're going to use is going to depend significantly on what the laws are that govern your agency. Those laws, in some cases, if you are a federal law enforcement officer, may be the Federal Labor Relations Act. If you're in state or some states that have collective bargaining laws, there's laws on the books that govern how this process works in those states. In some states, there are no statewide laws, but there are local laws that apply or local court cases. You need to figure out what's going to apply in your particular case and figure out what it is you need to do. Does it require a card? Does it require a petition? If it requires a card or a petition, what does the law say that the card has to say on it? And there almost is word-for-word language in a lot of these laws that you must put on the card in order for it to be valid, or you must put on the petition. You need to know the answer to those questions before you can start in the interest card and petition process. You need your committee members to then take whatever the interest card or the petition and go out to obtain members' signatures. You need to go to each individual and ask them to sign your interest card or to sign your petition. The greater number of signatures that you obtain now, the better you will be. People will feel a little bit more committed to you if they've signed a piece of paper. Some things you need to know about. You need to know how long that signature is valid for. There are some states that say that those signatures are good for a year. There are some places that say that the signatures are good for a number less than that, 6 months, 3 months. I've even seen a month. You need to know how long you've got to obtain signatures and how long that signature will be valid. You also need to make sure that you've got a process in place to make sure that the security of the documents that you have them sign is great. Doesn't do you any good to have cards signed that end up in somebody's glove compartment in their car and you never get them back and you never therefore get them turned in. You've got to have a process to collect your cards after they've been signed and a process to secure them. we strongly encourage you, as every card comes in, you make a copy of it. You then put the original card, lock it up somewhere in a file-proof filing cabinet or a safety deposit box if you've got one, or somewhere secure that most people cannot get to, that's protected so that somebody can't get in and mess with your cards. They can look at, if members of the committee need to look at who's signed cards, who hasn't signed cards, and you should be tracking that on that roster that you're keeping track of. But if a member of the committee and they need to see a copy of the card, show them a copy of it. You don't have to pull out the original card to do that. If you have to go back out to obtain a signature a second time, it makes you look like you didn't know what you were doing. So make sure you're secure in the way you're handling these cards. When you want to go out and obtain signatures, your best way to do that is face-to-face. Our members react a lot better when you walk up to them and ask them to do something than they do when you put a card in the mail and ask them to return it. You need to know how many cards you need to get back. Most laws require 30% of the bargaining unit, the proposed bargaining unit, to sign cards to even get an election. We encourage you to work towards trying to get as many cards as you want. If you get 75% or more, you're in pretty good shape when it comes time for the election. That doesn't mean you get 75% of the people are going to vote for you come the election, but it does mean that it's going to be a lot more difficult for somebody else to challenge you. Here's a sample of what a card generally looks like around the country. They will differ from location to location. We can, again, help you try to identify what should be on your card, what should be on your petition. I want to talk now about the different kinds of petitions that are out there, or interest cards. It may be that you're going to have a certification election. You may be having to have a decertification election because of what your law says or the situation you're in. Or it may be that you have no procedure on the books and you got to figure out a way to do that. When you're going after a certification election, that means that you're either in a window period, which is provided for under your law. It's the open window. If you're currently represented by somebody else, there's an open window in virtually every agreement and under every law that allows somebody else to challenge to be the bargaining agent. You need to know when that window period is as part of your effort, and it's generally 60 to 90 days before the expiration of the current agreement. In some cases, it's 60 to 90 days before the anniversary date of the agreement every year, because there are some places where there's a certification, an open window every single year, in spite of the fact that the agreement may be of a longer duration than 1 year. And it may be that there's a window that opens up again after the current contract expires. Most laws provide that after the current contract expires, there is a second window that opens. You need to know when that window is. And in that case, you want to go out and you're going to try for a certification petition. Be aware that other groups can try to get involved in that effort. Most laws say that you have to have 30%, or the initial organization trying to get certified has to have 30%, and others who want to intervene into the effort have to have 10% of the bargaining unit. You need to be very careful about what the law says, what the contents of your petition or card say, and you need to know what the options are for whoever the authority is that's going to handle the petitions. Now, that's a little bit different than a decertification petition. There are some states that require to remove the current bargaining agent, they have to be decertified, which is a vote to say that they should be replaced, that you don't want them to any longer be the bargaining agent. And then there has to be a second vote to certify a new bargaining agent. So you need to be very aware of your situation and what your laws say. The purpose of a decertification petition is to replace an existing bargaining agent. In some cases, you may need to be able to show cause as to why that agent should be replaced. And you need to think about and be aware of what the options are for the Public Relations Employee Board or whatever group oversees the petition and election process, ways that they will handle the various petitions. There are some states that just don't have a procedure. Missouri is one of those. The Supreme Court in Missouri in 2007, issued an opinion that said that the state constitution allowed for and provided for collective bargaining, but the Supreme Court also said that they could not impose a bargaining procedure for police officers, firefighters, and teachers, and those were the only people who did not have a procedure under Missouri state law. The Supreme Court said they could not impose a procedure. So the FOP in Missouri has been very successful in going to into a number of individual communities and asking them to develop a procedure by which the officers can bargain. And if the entity refuses to create a procedure, the FOP has been successful in going to court in the state of Missouri and getting the court to impose a procedure, to order one to be crafted, and if one's not crafted by the employer, to then impose a procedure. So those of you that do not have a procedure in law, there are ways that you may be successful in getting a procedure. Just because there isn't a procedure, your employer cannot deny you the right to bargain if you have that kind of right. Now that you've got your cards, you've got your petition, you've been successful, your next step is to win the election. You have to file your cards. They will certify that you, in fact, had enough to require an election. Your employer may voluntarily agree to recognize you, or you may be required to go to a certification election. And that may take time, particularly if you're dealing with a state board. It will take you some time. While all of that is pending, continue your process. You don't need to continue to obtain cards, but continue your campaign. Continue to talk to people. As the campaign approaches and you get closer, you need to start focusing on no longer persuading people to vote for you or to sign cards for you, but getting your people out to show up to vote. Getting people to say they support you is great, but it doesn't do you any good unless they show up and actually vote for you. On election day, you need to have people out there. Use your ranking system. Make sure that your ones and your twos show up and vote for you. Talk to your threes and ignore your 4 and 5s. Don't mess with them. If there's still 4s and 5s come election day, talking to them at the polls is not going to do any good for you. Remember, every vote counts. You have to get your people out. You have to get them to vote. Your leadership needs to own this campaign. We've talked about that time and time again in this presentation. You need to think about how your board can get involved, and a great place to have is to have them do poll watching, to give them a role to play on election day. If they haven't played much of a role in your effort, you can think about having them watch the balloting, having them talking to people outside the polls, having the president of the local lodge stand outside on the sidewalk and talk to people as they come in carries some weight with a lot of members. So think about how you can best use your board in that effort. Now you've gone through, you've won your election. Hopefully throughout the campaign you didn't make a lot of promises, but a lot of you will have made some promises about things that your lodge is going to try to do. If you've told people you're going to do things, make sure that you follow through. Make sure that you keep that list and you keep your promises. Do not forget what you've told people that you have done. Remember that serving your members comes first. Also remember that you have a duty of fair representation. You need to continue to serve your membership. You need to continue your communications with the member. You need to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. You need to administer the collective bargaining agreement. You need to process grievances and fulfill your legal obligation in the duty of fair representation. The duty of fair representation was originally recognized in the 1940s in a series of cases involving racial discrimination by railway worker unions. You need to be aware of who you bargain for, and you have to represent everybody in your bargaining unit, whether they pay you dues or not. Now, some of you will have the right to collect a fair share fee from those who do not want to pay you, but whether they pay you or they do not, you still have to make sure that you represent the interest of everybody in your bargaining unit. You just became the exclusive representative of everybody in your bargaining unit. You need to be aware of that. Some other issues that you ought to be aware of is if some of you are in states that have at-will employment, and the benefit to you versus having an employment contract is significant, and we'll talk about that in a minute. At-will employees have virtually little protection from termination without cause. Your employer in a lot of those cases can just walk up and say, you don't work here anymore, you're gone. And even if they don't do that, a lot of officers in those situations feel a lot of pressure because they believe that there's an implied threat there, whether that threat is ever executed or not. Contractual employees generally can be terminated only for just cause or for cause, and that there's procedures that have to be followed, and the employer's got the duty and the burden to prove that they had cause to terminate an employee. That's unlike an at-will employee. The bargaining unit, you need to make sure that you're very conscious of who all is in your bargaining unit. There are some states that require that supervisors not be in the same bargaining unit with superiors. There are some states that require that non-law enforcement positions in a police department must be in the same bargaining unit with law enforcement officers. So you need to be very aware, back to looking at the law and being very aware of what the law requires. When you structure your lodge to be the bargaining agent, you need to think about the structure. We have lodges in this country where the one lodge is the bargaining agent for 25 different bargaining units. and they negotiate a separate contract for each of those bargaining units, and those bargaining units ratify separate from lodge meetings. They have their own meetings and they make decisions about what they need separate and apart from the lodge meeting, but it's all done by the local lodge. We also have bargaining units and lodges that are single agencies, and the only people that are members of that lodge are members of that bargaining unit. We have everything in between. We have places where we've got single entities where everybody's a member of the lodge, but they also have retirees, and they also have some management personnel in the lodge. So you need to think about how you're going to be structured, and you need to think about how you have to be structured under the law that covers your bargaining process, whether that's the Federal Labor Relations Act, a state statute, or some local authority. When it's all said and done, you negotiate a contract. You want to negotiate a contract that gets put in writing and sets forth all the matters that you've agreed to in the process. Know your laws. Know the process. Understand the procedures, and make sure that you're filing the right forms when it's time for you to go through this campaign. Make sure you know what you're doing, and if you don't know, get help. Ask. We can help you. In order for your lodge to be successful in obtaining bargaining rights and becoming the bargaining agent, you need the support of the members. You need to ask for recognition. You need to be involved politically. You need to be involved with your communities. You need to be aware whether or not you can, in the state of Maryland, they have to put an initiative on the ballot and have the public vote to give them the right to collectively bargain. That may be what you have to do. There are processes that you can use to help get the right to bargain, and processes that you can use to represent your members. The National FOP Labor Services Division is always available to you at no charge for advice and guidance. If you wish it, the National FOP also provides full labor services. We will come in by contract with your lodge and provide somebody to bargain your contracts, to process your grievances, to run your organizing campaign, to represent your members in disciplinary hearings through the National FOP Legal Defense Plan, to represent your members in civil and criminal cases. Everything that the lodge is taking on as the bargaining agent, the National will provide to that lodge if the lodge wishes it. And that's an agreement that's made between the lodge and the National FOP. There are some lodges who want to only buy certain services, and we sell those services piece by piece, depending upon what you want and how you want them, and we bill you for the actual time involved and the expenses incurred. We also do these webinars. We do a series of training. Tomorrow I'm going to Nashville. We're doing Leadership Matters in Nashville on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this week. 2 weeks from now, we're doing the Labor Forum and then the Legal Counselors Seminar in Vegas. We're doing a Basic Collective Bargaining Seminar in April in Vegas. So we have training available. We're doing on-site training later on at the end of next week, at the end of this month in Delaware for a local lodge in Delaware at their request. The way we do on-site training is you pay the cost of us sending our instructors in there. You pay nothing for the instructor's time. The National FOP picks up that cost. You just pick up the actual expenses of the training process. We appreciate you being part of this webinar. Remember that I know a number of you submitted questions and we didn't get to some of your questions. We will email you a list of all the questions asked and the answers. You can get a copy of this presentation on the National FOP website. And for those of you who want a certificate of attendance, we will be emailing you the information on how to get a certificate so that you will have that available. If you need us, please do not hesitate to contact us. You can call us through the 800 number, 800-451-2711, or you can contact us at labor@fop.net. With that, I want to thank you. I appreciate your attention. It's been great having an opportunity to spend time with you. Thank you.